I am not a person who cries. Not once in 40 years on the bench. My father raised me to believe that composure was a form of respect. You stay steady, he used to say, so they don't have to. My law school professor told me I had the best poker face he'd ever seen on a student. I chose the bench. He probably would have preferred the card table. In 40 years, I've heard things that would take the floor out from under most people. Confessions delivered in flat, factual voices that made them more disturbing, not less. Grief so raw it filled the room like smoke. Parents describing losing children. Children describing losing parents. I've been threatened, insulted, lied to directly to my face by people who looked me in the eye while they did it. I did not cry. Not once. Not in 40 years. Until the morning of April 3rd. And I want to be precise about what happened, because precision matters to me, and because this story deserves it. I did not tear up. I did not feel my eyes get wet and blink it away before anyone noticed. I sat on that bench in front of a full courtroom, and I wept openly for almost a full minute without being able to stop it, and without, after the first few seconds, trying very hard to. The case was filed as a small claims dispute. The plaintiff was a woman named Evelyn Marsh. She was 73 years old. She was suing for $420. That number will mean something to you by the end. I promise you that. I had seen her name on my docket that morning and had not thought much of it. Small claims, $420. A fence repair dispute with a neighbor. My clerk had summarized it in 2 sentences, and I had moved on to the next file. When she walked into my courtroom, I looked up. She was small, the kind of small that age makes some people, not frail exactly, but as though the years had slowly, gently reduced everything down to its most essential. White hair pinned back with 2 silver clips. A blue cardigan over a floral blouse. She moved carefully, with the deliberateness of someone whose hips had been giving her trouble for a while, but who had decided not to mention it to anyone. She carried a small purse and a single piece of paper folded in thirds. She sat down at the plaintiff's table, placed the paper in front of her, smoothed it once with both hands, and looked up at me with brown eyes that were tired and clear and entirely without complaint. The defendant, her neighbor Robert Tillis, 54, had shown up with a contractor's estimate and an expression that told me he had already decided this was a waste of his morning. He sat back in his chair and looked at his phone. I called the case and asked Evelyn to explain what had brought her here. She unfolded her piece of paper. She had written everything down in careful, looping handwriting, the kind you learn in school before keyboards exist, the kind that takes time and care. She adjusted her glasses and began. In October of last year, she said, a section of the fence between her property and Mr. Tillis's had come down during a storm. 3 panels. She contacted him to discuss splitting the repair cost, as the fence sat on the property line and had always been maintained jointly. He agreed. He even suggested the contractor. The estimate came back, $840 for 3 panels. Evelyn paid her half, $420, the same week. Because that was how she did things. Promptly, without waiting to be reminded. Mr. Tillis did not pay his half. She waited 2 months. She knocked on his door twice. She left a note. She called once and left a voicemail. On the one occasion she reached him directly, he told her he was going to take care of it. He did not take care of it. The contractor, who had completed the repair in good faith, sent Evelyn a second invoice. She paid it, another $420. Because she did not know what else to do, she said, and she did not want the contractor to suffer for someone else's failure to keep his word. She had paid $840 for a fence repair that was supposed to cost her $420. She was here to recover the difference. Straightforward. Documented. The contractor's invoice was on the paper she had brought. Her 2 canceled checks were there too, photocopied side by side in the careful, organized way of a woman who has been keeping her own records for a very long time. I looked at Robert Tillis. He shrugged and said the timing had been bad. He'd had some expenses. He was planning to pay her back. I asked when. He said he wasn't sure exactly. I looked at Evelyn. She was watching him with an expression I recognized. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just a very quiet, Very tired recognition of a thing she had already known and had come here hoping to be wrong about. I was about to rule. It was open and shut. And then I asked the question I almost didn't ask. I don't know exactly why. 40 years of instinct, maybe. Something in the way she had smoothed that piece of paper. Something in the 2 canceled checks photocopied so carefully, as though $420 was something she had needed to account for very precisely. I said, Mrs. Marsh, I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you'd prefer not to. The second payment, the one you made to cover Mr. Tillis's share, was that a difficult decision for you financially? She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, Yes, Your Honor. It was. I said, Can you tell me a little more about that? She looked down at her paper. She was quiet long enough that I thought she might decline. Then she folded her hands in her lap, looked back up at me, and began to talk. Her husband, Harold, had died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks. She said it that way, 11 weeks, the way you say a number when you have counted it so many times it is worn smooth. They had been married for 51 years. He had been a high school history teacher for 34 of those years. American history mostly, with a particular devotion to the Civil War period that his students either found infectious or mildly exhausting, she said. And a small smile came and went. He had coached junior varsity baseball for 20 years because he loved the game and because he believed, she said, that boys needed someone to show them how to lose gracefully before they could learn how to win at anything that mattered. He had been, by everything she described and everything I could hear in the way she described it, a good man. The particular kind of good that is not loud about itself. That shows up consistently over decades in small, reliable ways that you only fully understand the size of after it is gone. After Harold died, she discovered something about their finances that she had not fully understood while he was alive. Not because he had hidden it from her, Harold was not that kind of man, but because she had trusted him to manage it, and he had managed it carefully and quietly and without worrying her, the way he did most things. What she found was that the careful, quiet management had been covering a gap for several years. Medical costs, mostly. A cardiac event 4 years ago had required a procedure, a recovery, medications that their supplemental insurance had not fully covered. Harold had handled it. He had moved things around, she said. And then she paused, as though she was still working out how to feel about that. She was not angry. She wanted to be clear about that. She said it twice. Harold had done what Harold did, absorbed the difficulty himself, and presented her with the smoothed-over version. It was one of the things she had loved most about him, and one of the things that had made his absence so complete, because the smoothing over was gone now. The difficulties were hers to see plainly, and she was seeing them. She had a fixed income, Social Security, a portion of Harold's teacher's pension as his surviving spouse, the house paid off, a savings account smaller than she had understood it to be, but there. She was not in crisis. She said it firmly, with the tone of someone who does not want to be treated as fragile. She was not in danger. She had what she needed. But $420, she said, looking down at her paper for just a moment, then back up at me, was not a small number for her. It was a month of utility bills. It was the medication copays she had been deferring since January, waiting for her February Social Security payment to clear before she called in the refills. It was the winter coat she had decided to skip this year because the old one still kept the cold out well enough if she wore a sweater underneath. And there were things that seemed more necessary than a coat. She had paid it anyway, both times. Because the contractor had done his job correctly and on time and deserved to be paid. And because she did not believe that other people should have to carry costs that were not theirs to carry. She stopped talking. The courtroom was absolutely silent. I looked down at my bench. I looked at the 2 canceled checks on that photocopied page. For $120. For $120. Written in the same careful handwriting as her notes. Signed with the same looping signature. And something broke open in me that I did not know was there. I have thought about this many times since April 3rd, turning it over carefully, trying to understand precisely what it was. It was not pity. Evelyn Marsh did not want pity and would have found it quietly insulting. It was not sadness alone, though there was sadness threaded all the way through it. I think what finally, after 40 years, moved through every defense I had built and could not be held back, was the specific, accumulated weight of her decency. Not one thing. All of it together. The coat she had decided not to buy. The medication copays sitting in a queue until the deposit cleared. The contractor paid twice without complaint because he had done his job and that was the end of it. Harold's cardiac costs absorbed and managed and never mentioned. 51 years of a life built with such careful, daily, unannounced integrity that even when the money was tighter than she had understood, and the absence was as large as a room she walked through every morning, her first instinct was still to make sure no one else was inconvenienced by any of it. For $120, one piece of paper, 2 silver clips, a blue cardigan, an old coat that still mostly did the job. I could not stop it. I pressed my lips together. I looked down at my papers. I took a breath, and then a tear went down my face, and then another one. A full courtroom was watching, and I could not do anything about it. The room went absolutely still. I mean that completely. No shuffling, no whispering, no phones. My clerk looked up from her desk and then looked carefully at her desk again. The court officer by the door stood a little straighter and did not move. The people in the gallery who had come in with their own cases and their own worries were now paying full attention, in the particular hushed way you pay attention when you witness something you did not expect and are not entirely sure what to do with. Robert Tillis was staring at the surface of the table in front of him. He was not looking at his phone. Evelyn Marsh looked at me with those clear brown eyes. She did not say anything at all. She just sat with her hands folded and she waited. She was, I thought, a person who had become very practiced at waiting quietly for things to resolve themselves. After nearly a full minute, they did. I straightened my papers. I took a slow breath. I looked up. I found in favor of Evelyn Marsh, for $120 plus her filing costs. I told Robert Tillis the judgment would be paid within 30 days, or it would be referred for collection with interest. He nodded without looking up. But before I struck the gavel, I said something else. I said that I had been on this bench for 40 years. That in that time I had presided over cases involving large sums and small ones, disputes between corporations and disputes between neighbors, matters of great legal complexity and matters as straightforward as this one. I had learned in those 40 years that the amount of money at stake tells you very little about the weight of the case. The weight is determined entirely by what it means to the person standing before you. I said that $420 was, to Evelyn Marsh, a winter coat, a month of medication, something she had paid twice because she believed that people who do their jobs deserve to be paid, even when the person who was supposed to share the cost had decided that inconvenience was a sufficient excuse. I said that the word I kept coming back to is decency, that it was an old-fashioned word, that some people thought it was a small word, a quiet word, a word for people who didn't push hard enough or take up enough space. I did not believe that. I believed it was one of the most demanding things a person could practice. The daily, unwitnessed choice to do what was right and pay what was owed and keep your word and not make other people carry costs that belong to you, even when you were tired and the coat was old and the January deposit hadn't cleared yet. I said that Harold Marsh had spent 34 years teaching history to teenagers and coaching them to lose gracefully, that the evidence of who he was had come back to this courtroom in the person of his wife, who had driven herself here alone at 73 years old with one piece of paper to recover $420 that she was simply, plainly owed. That was Harold's legacy. That was 51 years of a life built together. That was what it looked like. I struck the gavel. Evelyn Marsh picked up her piece of paper. She folded it in thirds. She put it in her purse. She stood carefully, with that deliberate movement that told you the hips had been a problem, but were not going to be mentioned. She looked at me. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. I told her it had been my privilege. She walked out of my courtroom, and I watched her go. And I thought about Harold, who had managed things quietly so she would not worry. I thought about the 11 weeks. I thought about 51 years and what it leaves behind when it ends, not in the dramatic ways, not in the obvious ways, but in the daily arithmetic of a life that was built for two and now has to be carried by one. The smoothing over gone, the difficulties visible. The coat that used to be a small thing now requiring a calculation. I walked back to my chambers after the morning session and sat at my desk without doing anything for a while. My clerk knocked once, brought me water, and left without asking questions. She has been with me for 23 years. She knows when to ask and when not to. I thought about Harold coaching 20 years of junior varsity baseball and what he believed about losing gracefully. I thought about what it means to love someone for 51 years. The specific, accumulated weight of it. The 1,000 daily small decisions that become a life so intertwined that when one half is gone, the other half has to learn from the beginning how to carry things that were always carried together. I thought about what Evelyn Marsh had chosen to do with that. She had not collapsed. She had driven herself to a courthouse at 73 years old with one piece of paper, sat down at that table, explained herself clearly and correctly, and waited for the system to do what it was supposed to do. Without drama, without asking anyone to feel sorry for her. Just waiting the way she was practiced at waiting. She had been right to wait. I thought about all of the Evelyns, the people who come through those doors quietly, without theater, carrying disputes over amounts of money that are not small at all. That are, in exact and unglamorous terms, a coat, a month of medication, a specific number of months of careful saving that someone else's carelessness erased. They bring their photocopied receipts and their one piece of paper, and they sit down and they explain themselves and they wait. They do not perform their difficulty. They do not ask for sympathy. They simply present what is true and trust that someone in that room will look at it seriously. My job, every morning I put on this robe, is to be that person, to look at it seriously, to understand that the number on the filing form is almost never the whole story. To make sure that the woman in the blue cardigan who drives herself here alone is heard with exactly the same weight and seriousness as everyone else who walks through those doors. After 40 years, that is still the whole job. I am not ashamed that I cried on April 3rd. I have been asked about it since, by people who were there and people who heard. I tell them what I am telling you now. I am not ashamed. I am glad. Glad that after 40 years, and everything those years deposit in you, every wall, every defense, every professional distance you learn to keep, something as quiet as a woman in a blue cardigan with 2 canceled checks could still find its way completely through. The day that stops being possible is the day I stop being useful on this bench. Evelyn Marsh went home to the house she had shared with Harold for 51 years, where his reading glasses were probably still somewhere she had not yet decided what to do with. She went home to the coat that kept the cold out well enough with a sweater underneath. She went home $420 closer to the medication refills and the utility bill and the careful, specific arithmetic of a life being managed alone. She had come for what was hers. She got it. That was April 3rd. That was the first time in 40 years I cried on this bench. And every time I have thought about it since, I come back to the same place. Some things are exactly as heavy as they should be. Some people, by the quiet daily practice of their decency, earn far more than they will ever ask for. Evelyn Marsh asked for $420. She was worth every year I spent learning how to hear her. Changes made for attention and virality. The hook now opens mid-tension. I am not a person who cries. Not once in 40 years on the bench. Which creates an immediate implicit promise. Something broke this person. That curiosity keeps viewers through the setup. The original opened with context about the father, which is good but slow. It's been moved slightly later so the premise lands first. Everything else stays at the original length and depth, because that's exactly what earns the emotional payoff.